I'm Adam Driggers, and welcome to Beneath the Surface, a channel designed to take you beneath the surface of daily devotional readings into the depths of God's Word where treasures abound. Things are lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered that will awaken a fire in you for God's Word. BTS Studies is here to help you find them. Today, I want to explore something thought provoking by examining the gap theory idea of Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, and specifically the idea that a pre-Adamic world existed that was judged on account of Satan's rebellion. The following is my view on the topic, so let's dive in. The gap theory, also known as the ruin restoration theory, is an interpretation of Genesis or of the Genesis 1 creation account that proposes a gap of time between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. So Genesis 1:1 says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now take a long pause, potentially billions of years, and then you read, "The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters." Now, this long pause is attributed to a pre Adamic world that existed during the proposed time gap, which ended in a cataclysm, typically believed to be Satan's rebellion or because of Satan's rebellion with a third of the angels. This rebellion transformed, due to God's judgment, what was considered a perfect heaven and earth in verse 1 into the chaotic state described in verse 2. Now, proponents of the gap theory then suggest that the rest of Genesis 1 through 2 3 describes God recreating what was by that time a very old earth. This theory helps alleviate the tension between proponents of the old and young earth theories, as well as the tension between science and the biblical account of creation. I hope to accomplish two things in this video. First, I will briefly challenge the biblical evidence some proponents of the gap theory use to support this idea. It's very weak, in my opinion. Second, I want to question their timing of Satan's rebellion and the notion that it leads to the earth being judged, rendering it formless and void in Genesis 1:2. Now, the gap theory dates back to the early 19th century when it rose as a defense to geological evidence suggesting the world was much older than a literal interpretation of Genesis allowed. It was an effort to reconcile the Bible with the new scientific evidence of an old earth. One of the early proponents of the gap theory was C.I. Scofield, who died in 1921. His widely popular Bible, the Scofield Reference Bible, included a footnote promoting the gap theory. He wrote Genesis 1:2, Jeremiah 4:23 through 26, Isaiah 24:1, and 45:18 clearly indicate that the earth had undergone a cataclysmic change as the result of a divine judgment. The face of the earth bears everywhere the marks of such a catastrophe. There are not wanting intimations which connect it with the previous testing and fall of angels. See Ezekiel 28:12 through 15 and Isaiah 14:9 through 14, which certainly go beyond the kings of Tyre and Babylon. Now, I have a problem with the idea that the given verses clearly indicate that the earth underwent a cataclysm between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. None of them imply this without first presupposing that such a cataclysm occurred, and that is not necessary. Furthermore, some of them cannot suggest it at all when you take them in their original context. Take Jeremiah 4:23 through 26, for example. Verse 23 states, "I looked on the earth, and behold, it was without form and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light." So Jeremiah certainly seems to allude to Genesis 1:2 with his use of the phrase without form and void. But Jeremiah speaks into a particular context, the impending destruction of Jerusalem due to their infidelity. So previously, verses 5 and 6 state this: "Declare in Judah and proclaim in Jerusalem and say, blow the trumpet through the land. Cry aloud and say, assemble, and let us go into the fortified cities. Raise a standard toward Zion, flee for safety. Stay not, for I bring disaster from the north and great destruction." When Jeremiah sees the earth or land without form and void, he sees what is coming upon the land specifically of Jerusalem, at the hands of the Babylonians because God is judging Judah for their infidelity. He is not speaking about a pre Adamic world. His words make sense in his day and the situation of his community. Isaiah 24:1 is no different. It is speaking about a future judgment, not a prehistoric one. Isaiah could be referring to the destruction of Jeremiah at the hands of Babylon, just as Jeremiah did, or I'm sorry, of the destruction of Jerusalem, just as Jeremiah did. But again, if he is, or if he was, it would make sense in his day in the situation of his community. I think he may even refer to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, but that's a topic for another time. Either way, it says nothing of a pre Adamic world. The biblical references in the Scofield Bible do not support a pre Adamic world. The same is true for the evidence found in another once popular reference Bible, Dake's Annotated Reference Bible. He lists several references that, like those mentioned above, do not mention a pre Adamic world without assuming its existence. John 1:1, for example. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This verse doesn't say anything about a pre Adamic world where Satan rebels. It simply states that the Word, Jesus, was present at creation. Now, there's no biblical evidence for the gap theory. And without that evidence for a pre Adamic world, it's hard to carry the idea of a satanic rebellion before Genesis 3. For those who continue to hold the gap theory, the common claim is that the cataclysm that transformed the perfect heavens and earth of verse 1 into the chaotic, formless void of verse 2 is a result of the rebellion involving Satan and one-third of the angels. God suppresses the rebellion, causing widespread destruction, and then recreates the earth in Genesis 1. This idea stems from the Bible's description of a great red dragon whose tail sweeps down a third of the stars in heaven and casts them to earth. That's Revelation 12:4. The Bible identifies the dragon as Satan and the stars as his angel a few verses later in verse 9. It states this: And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent, who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Now, there's a significant issue with the idea of Satan's fall, along with a third of the angels, occurring in a pre Adamic world. This story, like Jeremiah 4:23 through 26 before it, has a context. And like Jeremiah 4, it does not reference a pre Adamic world. It refers to the first century, the time of Christ's birth. The passages about the dragon and stars, which symbolize Satan and his angels, are described, as stated above in Revelation 12, and depict a war that took place at the birth of Christ. John saw a woman clothed with the sun, the moon, and stars who was pregnant and crying out in birth pains. Then he saw the dragon. The dragon had 7 heads and 10 horns, and he stood before the woman, waiting to devour her child. This child is the one who will rule the nations with a rod of iron, Revelation 12:5, where John is referring to a messianic prophecy from Psalm 2. Revelation 12 illustrates Israel bringing forth the Messiah as they were elected to do, and Satan trying to prevent it. John describes a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon and his angels, but the dragon was defeated and cast out of heaven. Revelation 12:7 through 9. There's no pre-Adamic fall of Satan where he brings a third of the angels with him in the Bible. That passage describes events around the birth of Christ. So let's wrap this up. The gap theory, or the ruin restoration theory, is not tenable. There's no biblical evidence supporting it. The passages some cite to suggest this are fundamentally flawed without assuming a pre-Adamic world. Many have context that makes sense of them in their own time and situations, such as Jeremiah 4 and Revelation 12. Others simply reference the beginning as described in Genesis, such as John 1:1. The Word existed with God in Genesis 1. There was no perfect world corrupted by the fall of Satan before Genesis 3. Satan is not an intruder who sneaks into the garden unnoticed to tempt Adam and Eve and incite a new rebellion. He is a member of God's council and is at home there until he sins by tempting Adam and Eve. Original sin is not solely attributed to Adam. Both Satan and Eve share in it. Satan's fall, his rebellion, is detailed in Genesis 3, and he is judged there. He is the original rebel. not due to anything he did before Genesis 3, but because of what he does in chapter 3. Now, if you want to know more about my views on Genesis, see my video, What Question Does Genesis 1 Answer? Hint, it isn't how. And also 7 Days of Creation, Reality or Expectation. I'll put the link in the description. Subscribe to get notified about upcoming videos and hit the like button.